Hey everyone. So this week I want to go over a little bit about Adobe Lightroom with you. And so I've got a couple versions of Lightroom, kind of the true Lightroom classic that you own for lifetime. And now Adobe has switched things over to really the Creative Cloud, where you have to purchase things monthly or annually. And it's essentially the same program. What I've got here is Lightroom Classic. I highly recommend when you go to download Lightroom or Lightroom Classic that you do choose the Classic version, and it gives you a few more options throughout. And so we've talked a little bit about the library module and the develop module. My hope today is to just walk you through a little bit more of the layout of these two modules, and then how to edit some photos. We've got a subset of photos right here that I've kind of termed class edit, and I will make a link available to you that you have access to all of these same photos. And I'll kind of walk you through things that we might do and try on each of these, and that will allow you to then take that same subset of photos, go into Lightroom, and hopefully make some of those same edits. And I've tried to give us a variety or a little bit of an array of things that you guys can try on several of these photos. And so with that, let's dive into kind of our first approach, that if we start our workflow, our post-processing of photos, we're going to go into the library module, and the first thing we're ever going to do is then import our photos. Now I already got a subset of those class edits sitting in there, but I just wanted to show you. If I click on the import module, then you'll immediately see right here where we're going to pull these files from. If I put an SD card in, usually you'll see over here D800 will pop up for my Nikon D800 camera. But if we had some photos locally on the computer, we could just go to a slot that I know there's some photos sitting right here in pictures, and all of a sudden you'd see a bunch of photos that pop up. And so the thing to remember, again, you could uncheck all, check all. Oftentimes, especially once the memory card's in, you can select by date if you've got a lot of different photos on from the same time. And notice we just have where it says add, because the thing with Lightroom, again, it's a database program, it's a non-destructive editor. It's not actually storing the original anywhere. It's just storing the location of those and then making a file that denotes any changes that you may want to make, okay? And so we could then check all of these, hit import, and it would pull them in to this current film strip, as you see here with class edit, okay? In terms of once you have photos in, the next thing becomes kind of assessing or calling photos. And you can all go about this a different way. You see your folder structure here, navigator pane. And truly, if you want in library, you can see everything as kind of small photos and icons. So you can see all 1,000 photos that you have here, or you can view that as the single. And so it's completely up to you on how you want to approach that. All of these file folders, just remember, again, like I said, Lightroom doesn't store the original. It's basing, all of this on where those are on your computer and keeping those originals there. So I tell you that because if you move those folders or files for that matter, all of a sudden you'll see a little question mark over top of this folder because it no longer knows where those photos are at. If I wanted to, and I put all of my new photos in this class edits folder for some reason, I could go and hit Synchronize Folder, okay? And if I click Synchronize Folder, anything that I add to that, it is then going to keep track of and constantly add to this kind of Lightroom catalog. So we've got all of our photos in here. We'll talk about export a little bit later. Really, we're going to focus on the import, assessing, calling, and then a little bit of the develop module today and walk you through things. And so when you first go through, there's a couple of things that you can do to assess and call photos. You can rate things based on various stars should you want to, or you could do pick and reject, okay? And so if I wanted this photo, I could all of a sudden click P, it says flag as pick. I could go to the next photo and I could say, oh, I don't know about that one. Click X, set as rejected. And I could just simply go through all of these photos with my finger on P and X and select, again, which ones we want to keep and which ones we want to reject. I could then come into our settings and we could choose to basically delete all of our, and so we could delete all of our rejected photos, okay? And so that's, again, one way of going about things. We can simply just remove these tags as well and no longer have them present. And so one thing to note is that you can also go through, and what I do is I just simply keep my hand on the arrow key, and then I'll walk through and I'll say, oh, delete, and then I just hit enter, and it's going to remove it from this library right here. And so it's all doing it all at once. I generally don't do delete from disk. The default is just to remove it from this little catalog. The original is still there should I want to go back and change my mind, okay? And so if we wanted to, we could take this, oh, we're going to keep this one, delete, and then enter, and then all of a sudden it's gone. We could just scroll through, okay? Now, should we want to undo that, we can just hit Control Z, and then all of a sudden we've got our file back, okay? So a little bit about how you want to assess and call. Like I said, I do 2 rounds of edits. I go through and delete everything I don't want. I don't like this photo. It's a little fuzzy. This one's, maybe horse's ears are back. I don't like the position of this horse while they're jumping, whatever the reason may be. But I delete everything first, and then my second round of edits truly make adjustments. In the library module, you're not going to really use this quick develop. I highly recommend you wait till you get to the develop module before you make any of these adjustments. The things I will point out here would be things like keywording and the metadata. Keywording, like I said, is a really great tool, especially in the beginning as you build a photographic library and you start editing photos. Add things in here that are simply, equine. And maybe you want to add, it's probably not a great description for this one. This one's, Kentucky, horse trip, whatever you want. But go through and apply some tags to each one of these photos. And then should somebody say, oh, I want a photo of giving a vaccination to a horse is in snow, you can go back and search like a database all of your photographs and pull that up. And gosh, I can't tell you the number of times I've had somebody come to me and say, hey, I'm looking for stock photography. I want a horse doing this or a person doing this. Somebody riding in the arena doing a sliding stop, and gosh, if I could just go back and easily search and done more keywords in the beginning, life would be a lot easier. And so truly make sure you have a good file folder structure and how you store your photos. If I could recommend anything, do some keywords throughout as well. Okay. The other thing would be in your metadata. This is what's stored about each one of these photos. Okay, and so this is just more of a FYI, but just so you know, everything related to that photo, the date and time that it was taken. This was May 24th, 2013. This was on the equine breed strip, okay? Focal length was 44 millimeters, ISO was 400, and we could see our lens and aperture sitting there as well. And so again, all of this data sits within this actual file. A lot of times you might see a GPS location. Up here, copyright is blank, but I can choose when we talk about export a little bit later to export my information and then fill it into this copyright spot. So should somebody else pull up the photo later, they would see that my name is now in the copyright position, okay? So that's the bulk of library module. You're really just going to use it to bring your photos in, assess them, call them, figure out which ones you want to keep, and then hopefully move to our develop module. The develop module, again, this is Adobe Lightroom, the counterpart of, right, if you had film and you were in a dark room, that's where you'd make a lot of your adjustments. Now we're in a Lightroom, and we're going to start to develop in a digital era in this sense, okay? And so now that we're in develop module, I honestly don't use a whole heck of a lot on the left side here. You've got your copy and paste. You've got some presets in here where maybe for black and white you want to do be a black and white landscape on a photo that you have right here, and we could go in and we could see maybe what some of these presets look like. And that's great. You can create presets of your own, and they're good things to kind of have. And so you want to go through and do that, great. But outside of having presets or anything else, I don't use a whole lot here. You do have a history. As we start to make some changes to this photograph, I made a bunch and then I reset it. And so you could see all the changes that I made to this photo, and I could go back and apply any of those, and I think that's pretty cool. So when it comes to editing your photo, and again, looking at them, we've got 23 photos down here on our film strip that we'll kind of walk our way through and show you some edits that we might make to each of them. Notice a couple things right off the bat. Your histogram, right? This is your midtones, and we then have our shadows and our highlights, and then we have our blacks and our whites on the far extremes. Okay, we want things to generally fill but not run up each side. If it again extends right here, we've got a lot of contrast. Okay, if it's really narrow, we don't have much contrast, pretty flat and muddy. But pay attention to this histogram. It doesn't lie. I'm always looking at this as we edit photos. And as we start to make adjustments, I kind of work from the top down. If we're going to crop anything, we could do that right off the bat. If we didn't think this photo was the right size, we wanted to maintain aspect ratio, we can lock this. And if we lock that, again, it's going to maintain this aspect ratio. The other thing that we could do is say, we want to print a 8 by 10. We could tell it that 8 by 10, and then I could choose where I want it to be. Okay. Let's keep this for now as our essentially as shot, or 4 by 6 would be the same thing. Okay. If you wanted to level something, again, a little bit slanted. I know this line is just the fence line. It's not truly the horizon, but let's say it was. I could click on this level, and I could from here pull all the way across and say this is my level horizon, and it's going to make my photograph reflect that. Okay, really easy way rather than just pulling this angle slider, and so I highly recommend trying that out. Once you have maybe done any crop, I start moving into our photo. First things right off the bat is white balance. I'm pretty happy with white balance on this. This is as shot. You can always try an auto, see what that does. If you like that better, that's great. You can take the turkey baster icon, and if you have something that's a light to medium gray, you can then click on that, try to get a custom white balance. The best thing would be if you had somebody holding up a gray card before you did a photo shoot, you could click this little turkey baster onto that gray card. You could even synchronize it with all of your subsequent photos. And so we could click on that horse's forelock and try to say, oh, we think we've got a white balance there. Or we could go back to something that's as shot. And so once we've set our white balance, we're going to roll through, and you see exposure, contrast, or highlights, shadows, whites, blacks. There's so much that we can pull back out of a photograph. And you look at this and you say, it's okay. It's a little dark in some areas, a little underexposed, a little flat, saturation colors. And so let's just see how we might edit that. When I roll through, all I do is hover my mouse over top of each one of these sliders, okay? And then rather than drag them with my mouse, though they're intended to do that, as I hover over exposure, I just simply click up or down, okay? And you'll see it moves one way or the other as it reflects in the photo and also the histogram, okay? And then I just simply move down to the next one, okay? And so we could come in here, we'll take out a little bit of highlights. We'll also take out some shadows. To take out shadows, we're going to go up. Look how much detail all of a sudden comes back in this horse, in the muscling, in this person, okay? You might have thought all that was lost, but it actually wasn't, okay? And so we're going to pull that exposure back down just a little bit. I'm watching the histogram, trying to keep things most of the time in the middle. Whites and blacks, I'm not going to touch a whole lot. We can bump up our clarity, and we're going to dehaze just a little from this haziness in the background. And then I'll up vibrance. Again, I really like the vibrance slider over the saturation. Vibrance is going to push those colors that are not oversaturated to kind of meet the others, whereas saturation as a whole just, again, increases all colors that are existent in that photograph. And so we've made some changes to this photo already. We could simply hit the backslash, and you would see the before, as it says here in the top right corner. We could click it again and see after. The other thing we could do, we could click this and see our two side by side. Tell me what you think. I like this photo quite a bit better than I do this one here on the left, okay? Now, remember, this photo doesn't actually exist anywhere until we export it, okay? Lightroom is saving all of the changes as I make them. So this little plus and minus tells me that I've made adjustments in the develop module, and so I know I've edited this photo, but until I export it, it doesn't actually exist. But again, lots of ways to view maybe changes that you've made. We could see the two side by side. We could scroll through a number of different options here, see before and after on top of each other, or split in the top and bottom half of the photo. Again, I like this way better than I do this. Look at all the muscling on that horse, okay? And again, I think it's incredible to be able to see how much detail you can pull back out of a photo. Or we can go back to the single view right here, okay? So we've made some adjustments on that photo. I just simply hit the next arrow and we move to our next photograph, okay? Now, right off the bat, we can tell we're clipping some highlights. If I go over top of it, you can tell everything that's red where I'm clipping those highlights. If I go over top of this, again, we'd start to see, again, we're clipping some shadows as well. And so we're reddening up the left side of this a little bit more than I would like. So right off the bat, I'm going to take this and we're going to just simply increase the exposure. Okay, this is increasing the midtones. Contrast is fine. We're going to take some highlights down. You can see we're no longer clipping highlights. And we're really going to get rid of some shadows. There's a lot of shadows in here, okay? And so we're going to go over top of this and look how much detail we can bring back out of this, okay? Whites and blacks, okay. I'm going to take a few of our blacks out. Clarity, we'll push up a hair, and then we'll add a little bit of vibrance to this photo. White balance probably looks okay. I'm going to take a few more highlights out as I look at that house in the background. We might play with exposure just a little now that we've brought highlights down. We're somewhat flat, but we're a lot better than we were before. And so if you looked at these two photos, you could look at them left and right. You know, this is way better than, say, this one here, okay? This is part of that editing process, that develop module that, again, all of your photos should go through, okay? Develop them before you send them off to a client or show them to anyone. And so that's just some adjustments. You can choose to do adjustments on your own that are a bit different, okay? You have an auto button here in tone, but I don't like this auto button. It generally doesn't know what I want or what I think that photo should look like. If I click auto, again, this is what it wants to make adjustments look like. I'm not quite happy like that, okay? I could hit Control Z and go back to where we were. And so we could look at that on the next photo just as an example. And so those are the adjustments I'd make on that one. I could click next again. You've seen this photo. This is Ruidoso. We got this sunset popping through. We got a good sky here, but we've lost all the detail in our foreground right here, okay? Now, again, it ultimately is up to you in creative control. There's a few things we could do right off the bat, okay? You could say, well, maybe I just want this to all be silhouette of the foreground and show the sky, okay? You could pretty much take this all the way down and have barely any of that showing, more silhouette, and you got a lot more detail and color to the sunset, okay? I can double click any of these and put them back to where they were at 0. This is a good example of a time that we might edit, and then we might try a little bit of the graduated filter, okay? And so we'll go up a little bit here. We'll go up again to get rid of some of those highlights, take out some of these shadows in the foreground. Look how much detail is already coming back. You can already see sprinklers on now and all of the grass and all kinds of detail that exists here, okay, that you might have thought was previously lost. We can pull that back down a little bit. Let's try this graduated filter, okay? And so we can take that and we'll just simply try to go in an upward fashion. And I've got this line relatively close to my horizon. And with this, now I might pull the shadows out even more. And again, this is a graduated filter, so you got more of 100% down here, up to 0%, 50% in the middle. I could bump our exposure just a little bit more. And so by doing that, we can all of a sudden look and maybe we want to make any other adjustments to the photo. Sure, we can do that. But right off the bat, we've retained a lot of the color of our sunset and clouds. We really didn't change that a whole lot. If we looked at our side by side, that looks relatively the same. But look at our detail in the foreground, okay? This was completely black, lacking detail. You might have thought it was all lost in the photograph, but we pulled all that back, okay? And so that's what I hope you start to get and grasp in Lightroom, is there's so much that can be done to save a photo. You thought something was underexposed, and man, you can pull a lot of that back, okay? You might choose to make other adjustments to it. That's great. You can do more than one filter. And so say you want to come from the top side. And now let's go, all the way to the bottom here. Maybe you want to accentuate that even more. We could then pull our exposure slider down on the top side, okay? And I don't want it quite that dark. We could pull out some highlights, try to cut down on that glare, and then maybe you choose to again play with some of the saturation. Okay, let's push that up a little bit. see some of the colors that exist there a little bit better. Maybe we take out some of the shadows in those clouds, okay? And so we can then all of a sudden hit done. We've got two graduated filters here, one coming from each direction, okay? Again, we can come in here, and I like this photo way better than I do this one right here, okay? So a couple of our edits. This one we don't need to do a whole lot to. We're just going to simply come over here, and again, hopefully you start to get an idea what you want to change. We're clipping a little bit on the shadow side, so I'm looking at my histogram right off the bat. I'm going to take my exposure. You can see it start to come back to life a little bit of contrast, cut down on some highlights that are there, and then really take out some of this shadow, and watching this curve come back to life right now, okay? Leave it about there. And add a little bit of vibrance. And that's about all I'm going to do to this photo, okay? But here's before, here's after. Quite a bit difference, okay? We go to our next one here. This is some students in the LOR barn, okay? Now, you could do a lot of different things to this photograph. I want you to have some creative control, and you maybe play around with some edits. Right off the bat, let's do a couple things. One bothers me is how overexposed this background is. And so right off the bat, we might say, well, let's fix that later. And so let's bring our photo back a little bit. We're going to take out some crazy highlights. Big thing we're going to adjust is some shadows, okay? And so we're going to start to take some of those shadows out of the horse, so that maybe you can see a little more detail in that horse and that person as a whole. And so we can bring this back to life just a little bit here. And as we bring this back to life, we'll cut down on that. We'll take out some of the whites. Then we might use, so we like most of our photo. I'm not convinced on the white balance. We might take this and go to this gray shirt and just change our white balance ever so slightly. We could take our adjustment brush, and once we have our adjustment brush on, again, you can double click effect, that resets everything. Remember, these sliders are sticky, okay? Roll my mouse wheel, and I can just choose to select what is back here in the background, okay? And you might choose to actually make some of those adjustments on this and just start to cut down on that exposure, okay? And so that's one of those things that you could initially do. There we go. Took a second to come into play. And so that way you could actually see where you've been, okay? We can cut down on some highlights. Maybe we don't want to push exposure quite to that extreme, but just take it away so it's not quite so bright, okay? And so you can still come back in here, and you could, again, come a little closer to the horse, do whatever you want, and then start to kind of fill in this area with your adjustment brush. You can also go back and use the erase, okay? And so if you say, well, I hit an area that I didn't want on a certain filter, and maybe I wanted to go back and bring that detail back into the photograph, you can sure as heck do that as well. And so we can make this extremely small. We could come in here and get a lot more detail. You guys could take more time looking at that as well. Maybe you want to bring some of this back under this person as well. It's all up to you on how much. You might feather it out a lot more than you would see right there. We could hit Control Z and simply take that back away, okay? But it's up to you on how much you want to do. You think that looks too much, we can just simply take a little more of those highlights out, and it's only going to affect that kind of adjustment brush area. And so again, even still, we looked at our before. You saw this, really tough to see. Look at our after, quite a bit of difference, okay? Madeline and Chelsea, we're going to take this photo into Photoshop a little bit later. But when you look at this right here, a couple things we could do. One, we'll just increase our exposure just a little on them. A little more contrast. We're going to take out some highlights. You can see we're clipping just a little bit. And so we're going to bring down our highlights. Madeline's shirt's a little white right here. Take out some shadows. Look at that life come back into these horses right here. That looks good, little texture. And then we're going to add a little bit of vibrance. Okay, we've got some colors in the background, mountains in the background. And I'm happy with things. Okay, little bit maybe that we're gonna dehaze things now that I look at it. We'll leave it about there. And so we could then throw these in a side by side. And again, we just have a little bit more color to them. We've taken the shadows out of this horse a little bit. It just looks a little more appealing here than here. Sometimes your adjustments are pretty minor. Sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're a bit more involved. Um, we could simply go to our next photo here. And so we could look at this. This is Horsetooth at night, or is it starting to get dark, I guess. And so here we've got our white balance as shot. We could go to auto. It's a big difference, okay? And so I'm going to leave it actually as shot, but I'm just going to start to bring our exposure up a little bit. I'm watching the histogram, but I'm bringing some detail back. I'm also going to take out some shadows. And then I'm going to bring down the highlights a little bit, up the contrast, and then up our vibrance a little bit. And again, this is a drastically different photo than what you just saw, okay? Much more detail in the reservoir and everywhere else on the ground than you saw on this kind of underexposed photo on the left. And so hopefully you get the idea of some adjustments we might make. Again, it's up to you in the creative control on what you want to do sometimes on the edits, but watch the histogram, keeping things in the middle. We're no longer clipping on the left or the right. We've got some good tones. We've got some good contrast in here. And again, I'm happy with things in the way they've turned out. You want to make further adjustments, then you're welcome to do so. This is a photo that we really lack the detail on the bottom here. And so right off the bat, maybe we could do some global adjustments, but I think really the biggest thing we're going to try here is we're going to put this, and you can see how we can do it at an angle, but we're going to put this filter over top of our horizon, and we're just going to start to bring a little more detail into that foreground. Okay, I don't want to drastically change the sky a whole heck of a lot. We could try to bring out a few more shadows here. Maybe not quite that much. Let's pull this up a little more. Okay. Maybe we bring that back down just a little. But you can, again, choose to do as much as you want. We could then be done with that. Maybe you want to come back down from the top like we did previously. I'm still okay with the sky here. It looked a little extreme before. But if you looked at these two side by side, a bit different. If you wanted the sky to be back like this, again, we know we can pull that detail back. But before we'd lost the foreground. We really pulled that foreground back. And so if you wanted to take this and play with the sky, you could do that via an adjustment brush, or we could simply go back to doing our graduated filter. We could take this and basically move this all the way down to really encompass our sky here, okay? We could say, well, let's go a little darker on that sky and try to bring some of that detail back. You can see we're really not touching much of the foreground that we previously adjusted. And so if you looked at that now, you bring back more of the kind of sky that was over here, and we still have our retained foreground. But again, you guys can spend more time and make some of those adjustments. Our next one here, again, this is Madeline and Chelsea at a show with two of our school horses here. Again, we go all over the place and take some photos, okay? First thing right off the bat, we're going to up some exposure. We're going to take out just a little bit of highlights when I look. We're not clipping anything. We're not too close, but we still have some. Bigger thing is going to be taking out some shadows. We got a lot of shadows in here looking at these two horses, okay? You want things to stay realistic, and sometimes you can push shadows too far, so you do have to be careful with that. We got some good fall colors. I want to up the vibrance, and I'm mostly okay with that right there. Well, we could play around a little more, take out a little more shadow maybe. Take out a little more shadow and add a little more contrast, it will help things. But if you looked at this and the detail of these horses, here's now and here was before, and so we've brought quite a bit back. to where we previously were. Again, some of that detail, again, just touch about bring back. You could go to the adjustment brush and you could paint on this horse. Again, you just want to keep things looking as realistic as possible. We'll move through some of these rather quickly now. So again, if you just wanted to see adjustments we could make, we could up our exposure. We're gonna take some highlights down, take out some shadows, and then I think we're about good on and everything else here. Okay. White balance, if you're unsure about, you could do an auto one. I'm gonna pull off the gray that I know that window is. But again, I'm pretty happy with the result that we have here. We just made some minor adjustments. Teddy, again, not the best shot, but let's right off the bat, we're going to take down some highlights of that snow so it's not just gleaming. And let's take out some shadows that we saw on Teddy, bring back some of the detail of him. Okay, we can take that down just a little. We don't want him to look too red. A little more contrast in here, and then add a little vibrance. And so right off the bat, you looked at him before and after, and again, we can add a little more detail back to him. June that you'd see here, like I said, roll through some of these just so you can maybe get the idea of some of these edits. I'm going to up exposure on her, and another big thing I'm going to do is up our shadows on her, take some of this down. I'm not so sure about the white balance. We could check it. It's reading pretty close to that if off that gray wall. Let's see. We take a little vibrance up. A little more. And so again, it's a little darker of a photo. I'm watching the histogram. I could push it towards the center like that, but to me it looks a little overexposed. So you're using your eye as well sometimes. Just knowing how the photo was taken and kind of a little bit of the side lighting that's kind of on her. But we can make some adjustments like that. This horse, nice photo that we took at the ERL. One of the things I'm going to do right off the bat is take out some shadows and take out some of the highlights. And then I might choose to make some of the whites, like that background, a little more white. Okay, and so I can push that white slider to the right. I'm going to gain a little more contrast in this photograph right here. And overall, I'd say I'm pretty happy with things. If you wanted to crop out, say, this little side right here, you can choose to crop that. Right now we're maintaining an aspect ratio. You can see that's locked right here. And so we're keeping things proportional. I can still slide that just like so. Hit enter and you'd see kind of our cropped version where we no longer see that fence. I like that a little bit better. Any other adjustments you want to make, we could take, and we might take our spot removal tool and maybe just a little, we might try to remove some of these shavings. But again, for the most part, if I'm going to do much of that, I'm going to go into Photoshop. Okay. I really don't like doing a whole lot of spot removal in here. Those tools are so much more powerful in Photoshop. But that looks pretty good. This is a cool photo. This is something that was taken with a very, very wide angle lens, okay? Because it was taken with such a wide angle lens, you get this geometric distortion that we've talked somewhat about. And so these light posts, we know they're really straight, but they're tilted in. And so we've got to correct that as well as our photo. And so right off the bat, let's just play with a couple things and do some global adjustments. And then we can come in. We're going to take some highlights out of these lampposts maybe. Take some shadows out of the administration building. Let us see a little more of what's hiding there, okay? Take some of these blacks out. Again, it's a night sky. I do want to keep it a night sky, but I want to see that building a little bit more in those trees. And so I've got it mostly where I want it. The next thing that I would show you, now I do have these in solo mode. You can see if I right click over here. And so what that means is Basic's open now, but just to not overwhelm my panel, if I go down to lens correction, Basic is going to collapse, okay? And so I could go into lens correction. We could also try a few things here. And so let's right off the bat look at this. This was something that we could go in Nikon. We got a 14 to 24 distortion. That's pretty good. And so we could go to an initial just profile correction for that lens. That helped a little bit. Let's go to this. Let's upright things. And so let's try auto and see what it does. So look at that. That's pretty slick, okay? And so we'll go to constrain crop. That way we don't see those white edges. But now these light posts are straight, okay? And we can see our admin building. We get a little bit better perspective as we kind of look down. We could try vertical over auto, but honestly it crops out a little too much of that picture. So we're just going to keep it to what we had before, okay? So now let's look at the two of those side by side. And so here, again, look at how much these tilt in. We've corrected a lot of that. And then again, we've got a nice admin building, the sidewalk looking in, a little more of the building, the detail over here on these sides as compared to this, as well as that night sky. Again, you can choose to do with it as you want. Go back to this. We're going to remove a little bit of that chromatic aberration as well, okay? And so, again, just giving you an example of something you might do. You want to do photos a little bit differently, and you want to go back to the basic and let it be a little bit darker. Take out some of those shadows. Then that's fine. You're welcome to do that. Okay. But I like doing the transformation. If you want to correct perspective, that's a cool way to be able to do that. We could take this photo right here. It's a little dark against this stained glass. Right off the bat, I'm watching a histogram. I know I'm clipping some shadows looking at this right here. And so I'm going to bring a little bit more detail and some midtones back to this. Take out some of the highlights, even though we're not pushing over, but I don't want them pushing through this too much in the center of that. Big thing I'm going to take out is the shadows. You can see we're no longer clipping, and we've pushed those quite a bit. I got a great stained glass here, and so I could do vibrance, or honestly I'm just going to push the saturation a little bit, and you can see how much more that comes to life with those colors. And so if you looked at these two side by side, we've brought a lot more back into this of both of the stained glass and the person and the detail that sits within this, okay? Bailey's sitting in the arena. And so, again, we're going to do a couple of things here with Bailey. Our histogram doesn't look too bad. And so I'm going to lighten Bailey just a little, watching our histogram, keeping an eye on that. I want a little more contrast in this photo. It's just a little muddy and kind of washed out. So we've added some contrast there. It's going to spread that histogram out. Here, take out a little highlight. We're not too bad, but just watching on a few spots of her, and then take out some shadows that are existing in this horse that I can see on his chest right now. And then a big thing I'm going to do is add some vibrance to this photo. Okay, I love the colors of her shirt and the yellow on that ram wall back there, and the blue on these wraps. And so again, I want all these colors to pop a little bit. I got a nice histogram right now, but if we look at the two of these, you don't see a drastic difference, but we've lightened Bailey up, we lightened the horse up a little bit, we've got better vibrance here, and again, just an all-around a little bit better photo. This one's a tough one. This one, our white balance is a little off. Maybe we might play with that right off the bat. We could try an auto and see what that does. It's going to do the same as what our custom was here. And so let's keep that on the roof line. It just changed the temp. You could see -2. Let's bring some exposure up in this. And the other big thing I can tell right off the bat that we're probably going to do, right, is remove some shadows. And so let's take out some of the shadows on those horses, take some of the highlights down a little bit. You can see how much more the photo comes to life. Let's dehaze it just a little, and then add a little more vibrance to this photograph right here. And so I'd say we're back to business here, okay? You look at these two side by side, way better photo than what we've got here on the left. And so you might take this photo, and again, you think things are done and lost, and you're not happy with your photo, but it's amazing what you can bring back to life in Lightroom. Sure, on this, it's tough with 4 horses and people. It was quick during a show. You're like, I don't have ears here, I don't have ears. These horses didn't want to cooperate. One horse was good, and the rest were being a little bit of a pill. And it is what it is. Sometimes you have to roll with the punches. Overcast day, but we dealt with it and moved on. but just showing you more of the editing process of that. Dr. McHugh, flesh and embryo here. And so we're going to right off the bat, just looking at the photo as well as our histogram, we're going to even things up a little bit. Okay, we're clipping some highlights. We're going to add just a little contrast. We're clipping some highlights, and so we're going to bring that down. You can see the clipping warning went away. And so we're no longer clipping anything. Take out some shadows. I can see some shadows in his shirt as well as Brittany's shirt. And so right off the bat, I'm going to start to bring that up. And again, I can bring that photo to life. When you start to push shadows up, sometimes your highlights come back though, okay? And so I'm gonna bring that back down a little more. You can see we're no longer clipping. We're in a pretty good business here. A little bit of vibrance. I like some vibrance. Just again, bring the colors out in people's shirts and hopefully make it a little more appealing. And so if you looked at those two photos compared, again, we got a much nicer photo here on the right side. Not too many more left to look at in our subset of developing. I like Amanda's face. When people are writing, sometimes you have to re-emphasize to them, smile, keep your mouth closed, keep your eyes open. It's always a tough thing. You can get a good photograph of the horse, but sometimes you don't always have that luxury with the people. Okay, so I'm push our exposure up a little bit. I want a little more contrast to this. We're not bad, but we're just going to spread things out just a little. Highlights we're fine on. Shadows is what we're going to take some out of. And so we're going to take some shadows out of Zane right here and Amanda's face. And then I got a lot of white in here, okay? I might just cut down on how that looks and then add a little bit more vibrance to it. And I'm pretty happy with Zane coming across the jumps right here. I'm going to try a little bit of a dehaze just to bring a little bit more of that in the background back to life. There we go. And so again, it's a little, there's no perfect science, but again, you look at the two compared, we got more color to everything. We can see more detail in Amanda and Zane coming across the jumps. So again, it's just overall a better photo. Again, remembering as you're looking at your histogram, you can also see your ISO. You can see your focal length that you took the photo at. I was pretty zoomed in, 200 millimeters. It's a zoom lens at the 70-200, so we're zoomed in all the way. F3.5, you can see how much we blow out the background. 1/800th of a second, more than enough to capture him as he's coming towards me in freeze frame on these feet right here. And so all this data, that's the metadata, all that's stored within this photograph. And again, we can then export this entire set here soon. Next photo is a couple things that we're going to do. This is the 4/6s. We've got some students here. And I'm going to edit the photo first and do some global, and then I'm going to do two different local adjustments, I think. Okay. And so I'm going to edit this photo as such. We're going to take out some highlights. We know we're clipping some highlights. And then let's take out some shadows. And then we're going to up some vibrance. So I'm overall okay. We're still a little bright in our sky. I'm going to try a graduated filter here. And then I'm just going to come down to about here. We're going to see what happens. And so I want to take down that a little bit in the sky, okay? And we're going to remove a little more of those highlights in the sky. We're going to add a little bit of saturation, okay? And so we've played with our sky. We got more detail back to that. I'm still okay. Again, it's a graduated filter. It's nice. We didn't really mess with our barn a whole lot. We still lack some detail in here. Next thing we might play with and try is we might do an adjustment brush, and we can make this a little bit bigger. And we might say we're going to come in here and let's just start it off. Let's up the shadows. Okay. And so we can just come in here and we're just going to try to, again, keep things looking realistic, but we can all of a sudden just bring back some detail in these people that are standing here. Okay. And you can take a lot more time to do all of this. Again, making sure that everything looks good and even in all of these people right here. Once you've gone over an area, it's not going to redo it, so I'm just making sure I've covered all of my bases. And I think we look pretty good right off the bat. If you think, oh, I hit too much up there, you can simply go to erase, and all of a sudden I can hit the minus sign, and maybe here I just take a little bit back out right there, and a little bit back out right there to the edge of the barn in the way that we were before. Okay, and then I can hit done. And so again, we did some global adjustments to the entire photo. We edited so our sky came back to life a little bit, and then we again brought some detail back to the center of this barn right here, to these people that are standing here. And so if we looked at these two side by side, gosh, look, this is almost a little washed out and overexposed in the sky and our sun. We've got that all back. And then again, we've lost detail in the barn. We got a nice good red color again to the 4/6 barn, and then now we can see our people in the center. And so again, lots of things that you might choose to do to that photo. Um, Here we've got a cool little shot, and so let's go back to our initial things. We might up our exposure a little bit. We're clipping some shadows. Again, it's a dark photo. It's okay. It's a fire. And so let's up some contrast here. Take out some highlights, and then I'm just going to take out a little bit of some of that shadow, but I want to keep the fire in there. I just want to see a little bit more detail of the sticks and the fire ring, maybe some of the people in the background to tell a little bit of a story. And then maybe we up some vibrance and even a little bit saturation. We really want that fire to glow and shine like that, okay? And so just simply doing that, again, you can push it to whatever extreme you want. And how bright you want to get it, okay? If you want it truly to look like that, great. I still want it to have a little bit of darkness to it. And so I might leave it right there, okay? But we still show our fire. We got all good color in the flames, frozen all of that. Again, this is at 1/69th of a second. And we've got some good detail of the charcoal, the embers, people on the stumps, kind of this around the campfire look that we have. And so if we again looked at R2, we've made some improvements on that, okay? Two photos left that we could look at today. And so one right off the bat, we got this photo and our horizon's in the center. I might choose to crop this a little bit and change it. We're going to maintain our aspect ratio, but I might crop this photo to where now the horizon, you can see it automatically splits when you crop into rule of thirds, okay? And so here you've got your 4 PowerPoints, and then we've got our 9 equal segments. I'm going to put the horizon now on this top third instead of the dead center. And so let's just hit done. And again, I like the way that's framed a little bit better than previously. We've maintained the same aspect ratio. It's still going to be the same size. We've just, again, enlarged that a little bit. And so right off the bat, looking at our histogram, we need to bring things to the right a little bit. And so watching that, we're bringing some light back. Take out a little highlights. Big thing we want to do is take out some shadows, especially of what is in the foreground here. Let's push our exposure just a little more. We can always bring highlights down. And then we need a little vibrance. We need a little color in this, okay? And so that's about all we're going to do to this photo. If you really wanted to, we could take our graduated filter, and maybe you want to do a little bit of that on the front end here. And so we could go back to our exposure, bring some of this detail in the foreground out, raise some of our shadows a little bit more, and then you could go back, click done. And again, we've got some pretty good detail now in the foreground that we'd previously lost. And so again, it's up to you on how much you want to do on each individual photo sometimes. This is a last photo. This is one that was taken in RAW. And so remember, with white balance in RAW, you could click and I can see all the different settings, same as what's on the camera. So these are fluorescent lights in here. And so I know that I can click on fluorescent. That's going to be pretty much the best white balance for me. You can see what it does to my temperature and my tint, okay? Now, this is one thing that it's 8:12 right now. I'm going to have to keep it as such. Just to show you, if I crop this to 8:10 and I said I needed a print of that, if I do that, I lose people on both sides. There's no way for me to easily crop this to an 8:10, okay? Or again, we no longer are going to have people in this photograph. Again, that kind of nominal size that's normal is an 8:12 coming out of the camera. I'm pretty happy with things. we could look at this now that we see this line here and say, well, let's level it up a little bit. I know this top of the chute is pretty level, but I also know all these beams in here are level, and so we could just take this. I know these are probably better than the chute, and we could come across and just say, hey, that's just a minor tweak, minor adjustment to that. That's good. We'll hit done. Let's go through and say right off the bat, we're going to up our exposure. It's way too much heavy on the left side. Look at all the detail coming back to these nice people in here. We can get a little more contrast in here. We're going to take out some highlights. You see we're clipping just a little bit. Pulling that down, you see the clipping signal go away. We don't have too many shadows, but I'm going to remove just a little bit in here as I'm watching these people pushing off the left side. And then let's add some vibrance for the colors that are in here between their shirts and the flag and the ram's head. And so pretty simple adjustments that we did on that. It didn't need a whole heck of a lot. But if we look at those two side by side, gosh, this is a little just washed out, lacking some detail, some color. All of a sudden comes to life over here. We've leveled it out just a little bit, and it makes all the world of difference. And so we're going to go through, and I want you to, that's the entire subset. I want you to make all those adjustments on your own, hopefully get used to editing these photographs. And again, this is something you're going to do on a regular basis. You're going to edit all of your photos once you've done this process. Obviously, we're talking about it. We took a little bit longer to do 23 photos. I might have 600 or 1,000 to do from a photo shoot, okay? And then from here, we could talk about taking this entire subset of 23 photos and exporting it. And so if we went back to library, we could then choose to export them, and we'll talk about that next time. And so the other thing I would mention to you guys, now that I go back to library, is let's just put up our quick develop again, just so the metadata goes away. But let's say on, gosh, this photo right here, these obviously all weren't taken at the same time. Let's pretend they were for a second. And I had a white balance in this photo that I wanted to sync with all of the others. And so I could go in here and then let's say we're going to skew this, and we'll go back and change it. But let's say, okay, I've got my white balance set to this. I want this white balance. I went and I chose a sample on this gray card right here. And I want that applied to now all my subsequent photos. Easy way to do that, because again, it's a database program in Lightroom. It's designed to work with lots of different photographs. It's designed for your entire workflow. And so I can then, I've got my first photo selected. I can then, now that it's selected, hit Control A, and we now select everything in that subset. But if you can tell, this is a little bit brighter white and a little bit darker gray on all these remaining ones. So it knows this is the primary and all the others are the secondary, okay? I can then go to Sync, and let's actually go to Sync Settings. And so we will bring this back over here. We could go to Sync Settings. We don't want to sync lens corrections. We don't want texture or dehaze. All I want is white balance. And I could take this and then all of a sudden click Synchronize. And all of a sudden across all of those photos, it is then going to synchronize that same white balance. And so we could go in here. We could look at the develop module, and you would see the same white balance settings that we set on that horse is now applied on this, okay? And again, I'm going to undo those changes just because, again, I don't want to sync my white balance across all of them, but we could very easily do that. So undo synchronize settings, and then again, from there, we could actually, if we had clicked sync settings, sync our white balance, and then sync all of those photos. But again, I don't want it set quite on that just now. And then we'll end up back here. And so that's a good way. The biggest things that you're probably ever going to synchronize are white balance and maybe noise reduction. You took a whole bunch of photos inside at a very high ISO. Maybe you want to get rid of the noise across the whole batch. And so with that, I hope you guys learned a little bit more about how to edit some photos, take some of the mystery out of Lightroom. Like I said, Lightroom is a pretty intuitive system. You're going to use the Lightroom to develop modules more than anything else, I can bet you. Probably not much on the map, book, slideshow, print, web web, etc. But these two very, very heavy. And so I want you to rely on them. If you have questions, please do reach out and ask. Happy to help walk you through any individual photos. You could see some adjustments you might make. You've got a lot of creative control, but what we did today utilized a little bit of everything in the library and the develop module on various photos and things we might tweak and adjust. And so with that, again, I hope you learned a good bit, and we will see you next time.